From Arts Edge at the John F. Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., this is Sad Songs Say So Much, a look at songs about disaster. I'm Paige Hernandez.
Cries of fire filled the air. Madden men ran everywhere in that big Ohio prison tragedy.
The rapper Chuck D once said that rap music is the CNN of the ghetto. Here's what he meant when he said that. Poor people don't have the means to tell the stories of their tragedies on TV, so they had to do it through songs. It turns out that's a pretty old idea.
Picture an old lady there, climbing up the smoldering stair, looking for her boy, a victim of the flames. Now her tears are falling fast, and she finds her son at last. All a-tremble, she looks on his charred remains.
It turns out that tradition didn't start with rap. It's been a long time that poor people have turned to music to talk about disasters that happen to them, and disasters that happen near them.
You could hear the children screaming as the flames were rolling high. Daddy, come and get your baby. Would you stand and see it die?
They use music to talk about death. And not death in general, but a specific death of a particular person, or about a particular earthquake, or about a terrible fire.
Telling of the sad disaster, Cleveland school was burning down.
These were things that tore holes in the very souls of people.
Stephen Mooney teaches English and Appalachian Studies at Virginia Tech University in Blacksburg, Virginia.
And human beings have to try to find ways to be able to make sense of soul-killing things. One channel of communication that was available to mountain people and that they were profoundly good at was music.
But on that fatal morning, before the break of day, while the people all lay sleeping, the hills began to sway. And homes and buildings trembled, went crashing to the ground. The town lay all in darkness, and light could not be found. There were wives and children.
We're talking about pre-television, and we're certainly talking about pre-personal computer.
And back then, one of the ways people would pass along news was through songs.
It's like, hey, everybody, look at this on your Facebook page.
Jason Schaefer is an English professor at the U.S. Naval Academy. He wrote a book about how ideas traveled around in the early days of America. He says that songs were spreading the news even in the days before there were a lot of printing presses.
The way that it often spreads is a social networking or a kind of viral marketing almost.
People would send each other songs by mail. They'd write the lyrics in a letter and say, "Hey, we all sang this song last night at the tavern. Pass it along."
Maybe somebody will send a song to a friend of his, and they're sending them back and forth. It's kind of an email forward almost, or it's very much the same way that you might post something that you want your friends to read on your Facebook page. It's a very sort of early form of social networking.
In the earliest days, they'd write songs about the British, or songs about liberty and revolution. And once America had gained its independence, the tradition kept up. And instead of singing about revolution, they turned to songs about everyday life, especially songs about disaster.
73 good men have perished. They all died at their post. 73 passed on to glory out on that Jersey coast.
But it's an odd thing. While people like to write songs about disasters, it turns out they write most only about certain kinds of disasters. There's actually a book. It's called Country Music Sources, where you can look up all of the American folk songs about disasters. When you go there, you find out, for instance, that there are only 2 songs about plane crashes, and There are songs about only 2 civilian shipwrecks. There's the Titanic.
It was on Monday morning, just about 1 o'clock, that the great Titanic began reeling rock.
And the Edmund Fitzgerald.
The church bell chimed till it rang 29 times for each man on the Edmund Fitzgerald.
There are only 4 songs about tornadoes.
When the cyclone appeared, it darkened the air. Yet the lightning flashed over the sky. And the children all cried, "Don't take us away and spare us to go back home."
For those kind of disasters, that's about it. And there's only 1 song about a flu epidemic, and only 1 song about kids drowning. Oddly though, what you will find if you look for disaster songs, there are 2 kinds of disasters that have a bunch of songs written about them. That's train wrecks and mining disasters. It seems so random, right? Why these 2 kinds of disasters and not anything else? Turns out, it's a little about geography and a little about human nature. First, geography.
It was an Appalachian tradition to write about events that occurred.
Katie Ledger-Lyle is the author of a book called Scalded to Death by the Steam: Authentic Stories of Railroad Disasters.
In Appalachia, there is a tradition of singing about whatever happens.
Did you see him going? It was early this morning. He passed by these houses on his way to the coal. He was tall, he was slender, and his dark eyes so tender. His occupation was mining, West Virginia, his home.
According to Virginia Tech professor Stephen Mooney, for people in this part of the country, writing and singing songs was just what you did.
When the men got home from their shifts, well, then they went out on their porches.
Someone would start singing and families would gather from all around. They'd sing about work, they'd sing hymns from church or songs that they'd written themselves about God, and they'd share these songs with the people around them.
Family members, community members, church members.
Sometimes, he says, people would write these songs without knowing or caring whether anyone would even hear them.
A song was written for no one but the person who produced it.
And as it happens, Appalachia's where the coal mines are.
One bright morning, a miner just about to leave heard his dear child screaming in affright. He went to her bed, then she looked up and said, "I have had such a dream, turn on the light."
Mining is a particularly difficult and dangerous kind of work. You're down, underground, in the dark. You're breathing in dust all day. There are fumes and poisonous gas. And you know, and your family knows, that at any time the walls could collapse and you'll be trapped or crushed.
People write songs about mining disasters because they have to.
It was just before 12 I was feeding the children. Ben Mosley came running to bring us the news. Number 8 is all flooded, many men are in danger.
To be a mother or a wife and to know that there has been an explosion underground and to stand outside in the cold to just try to find out any sense of whether your loved one is alive. And the fear and stark terror, there's almost no room within the context of a mining song for it to be anything but a kind of articulation of terror and fear and worry.
Now what can I say to his poor little children? Or what can I tell his old mother at home? Or what can I say to my heart that's clear broken?
There were 500,000 coal miners in the 1930s in Appalachia, a huge number in a place that didn't have a lot of people to begin with. all writing songs about work. Stephen Mooney says there's another thing that explains why there are so many mining disaster songs. That, he says, is power.
A kind of omnipotent level of power on the part of the mining industry.
The companies controlled everything, what you could buy, what you could eat, but they also controlled the newspapers. They controlled what was taught in schools, while the miners themselves were mostly people who couldn't read or write. So it was the companies that were writing the history books and the articles that explained life in that region. For the miners, Mooney says,
one channel of communication was songs and the writing of songs.
I know someday he'll leave this earth, and I will stay behind. But when he leaves, I hope it's not caused by that old coal mine.
So mining disaster songs were heartfelt. They were a personal expression of the hardship and suffering of people who lived in great danger. And for the most part, they weren't written for money. Train wreck songs, on the other hand, were something else entirely.
Railroad disaster songs don't have the kind of very, very personal nature to them.
After a train wreck, a guy would just come running in there, and within 24 hours, he would have broadsides selling for a penny each on the street about this train wreck that had occurred. They were poorly written. Sometimes the rhymes were just dreadful, or they didn't even rhyme at all.
One dark stormy night, not a star was in sight. The north wind came howling down the line. There stood a brave engineer with his sweetheart so dear, and his orders to pull old number 9.
Railroad trains were the most exotic technology of their time. They were huge and powerful. They could take you over mountains and across rivers. They could get you where you were going in no time at all. And according to Katie Ledger-Lyle,
the railroads are really what built America.
The machine was a beautiful, shining, charging beast. And up in front driving were the heroes, the young, handsome engineers.
They were only raised up the way movie stars are now. And a lot of them actually had a fan club that would stand at stations when their trains were due in and wave to them and throw them kisses and bring them homemade goodies and stuff. A lot of them, because they were regarded as heroes.
The wheels hummed a song as the train rolled along. The black smoke came pouring from the stack.
When she was writing her book, Katie went in and read all the government reports about the wrecks that these songs were about. She learned something important about what caused these crashes. Turns out, the blame lay mostly with those hero engineers.
They just rode their engines too fast.
Of course, in the songs, you never heard about that.
The foolhardiness of the engineer is never a part of the song. He is noble, and he says to please remember my children and, things like that. No, he's very noble to the end. Never mind that he might have been drunk in reality, or that he was definitely driving his train too fast.
He sped round the hill, and his brave heart stood still. The headlight was shining in his face.
These railroad disaster songs always followed a pattern. You could line them up side by side, and they'd all be pretty much the same. At the start, you'd hear about the weather.
Like 'twas a cold and dark, cloudy evening just before the close of the day. Or it was in the midst of May, and the green leaves were just coming out on the trees, so that the listener could get a kind of pictorial idea of what was going on.
On that cold and dark cloud evening, just before the close of the day, there came Harry, Lyle, and Dillard, and with them the sun they rode away.
Then the story would begin. And pretty soon, you'd have the engineer and his fireman having their final conversation.
And always a kind of hint, like little did they know this was to be their final ride.
And they joked with each other as they sped on their way side by side. And the old engine rocked as she traveled through the night on that last fatal ride.
And sometimes a doctor would interact with them before they died. The doctor said, "Oh, Georgie, your life cannot be saved. Murdered upon the railroad and laid in a lonesome grave."
Cannot be saved. Murdered upon a railroad and laid in a lonesome grave.
Almost always there'd be a moral. Never anything about being more careful driving the train, mind you. No, it was usually something about make sure you pray every morning because you'll never know when you'll die. Or it was a lesson for the engineer's girlfriend.
Now, fair ladies, take this warning from this time now and learn.
Now all you ladies, you better take a warning from this time on and learn. Never speak harsh words to your true love or husband. He may leave you and never return.
We really don't have these kinds of songs anymore, these disaster songs. Stephen Mooney says that's mostly because we don't have those kinds of communities anymore.
Most Central Appalachian people had had a long enough experience with the coal mining industry that the one thing that they knew for sure that they wanted for their children was to keep them out of the coal mines.
Come and listen, you fellas, so young and so fine, and seek not your fortune in the dark, dreary mine.
From the time that I was literally 6 or 7, what I heard again and again was, you're not going to go down in those mines.
At the same time, more educational opportunities opened up in these communities, and machines came in to replace a lot of the physical labor that used to be done by men. But while all that was certainly healthier for the people who lived in Appalachia, Stephen Mooney says that you can't help but say that losing all that meant losing something important too.
You just can't recreate a culture that no longer exists. These things are gone, and they can't be brought back.
And gone along with them is a style of music, the song of disaster that we may never see again.
Where the demons of death often come by surprise. One fall of the slate and you're buried alive, where it's dark as a dungeon.
Thanks for listening. I'm Paige Hernandez for Arts Edge, a program of the Education Department of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts.
Where the rain never falls and the sun never shines. It's dark as a dungeon way down in